In the last tutorial we created a layout and we set up the page size, and now we're ready to start putting our drawings onto the paper. Now you can actually draw directly onto the paper and you can use all the usual 2D tools and the layer facilities that you would in the model space. And so the first thing I like to do is to insert my title block directly onto the page. So I'm going to go to the Insert and then Insert button and pick up my title block. And if you haven't got your title block in this drawing file, you can always copy and paste it in from another drawing. And I'm going to insert this title block in the bottom right hand corner because it's usual for us to have this situated down at the bottom here on the right, so that when the page is folded up it is on display, so that you don't have to unfold the drawing in order to be able to see what the drawing is of. Okay, so now you can see that I can fill in some of these dynamic text fields, or attribute definitions as they're called. So I'm just going to speed this up for a second whilst I just fill in some of these. Okay, and then that's all done. And the really important thing here is that I've got my scale on here as 1 to 25. I'm going to click OK. And that's gone in. Now you can see that's rather large at this precise moment, but that's just because we drew it originally, if you remember, at sort of a 1 meter dimension in length, so it's really quite big, and we did that just to make it easier to draw. But now what we can do is we can just click on the bottom right as our base point and just scale this back down to a decent size, and you want to aim for sort of about a quarter of the size of the page going along the bottom there, so that when it's folded up you see the entire title block. It looks rather small here, but remember this is an A0 sheet of paper, so it can be a little bit deceptive. So I'm going to click in the top left hand corner here, and that is my page border in. The next thing I want to do is add a picture of my model space into this drawing. And the way we do that is by using a viewport. Now the viewport tools live up here on the layout viewports panel, and you can see that we've got a drop down here and we've got the rectangular, polygonal and object tools. So we're just going to have a go with the rectangular tool for a start, and you can see that when I click I'm basically drawing a rectangle, and inside of there you can see I've got my model. That model looks exactly as it did in the model space. So you can see that it's in realistic and it's in the home position. And if I change this to 2D wireframe and I look at this from the top, you can see that when I add a new viewport, it will go in exactly like the model space. So that's quite a nice little feature really, because you can set up your model space, create a viewport, and it's pretty much looking exactly how you want it to. The second thing you may notice is that the border is red, and that's because we've drawn it on the elevation dimensions layer. Now that's a really bad habit to get into really, because if we ever make this layer invisible, we won't be able to get back to our border to be able to select it. So the next thing I'm going to do is create a new layer, and I'll create it from the 0 layer, because then I'll get the same colour information populated into my new layer. And I'm going to just call this viewports. And you can see in here we have a couple of new columns to think about. So we've got the colour column, which we're used to, but we also have the viewport colour, and we have a new viewport freeze or thaw button, and actually we also have a column here called VP freeze. So we need to consider what they will do. Okay, so now I need to select this viewport, and I just need to make sure that it's sitting on my viewports layer, and you can see that the border has gone black. So that's the rectangular tool. That's not the only way to put a viewport into my drawing. I can also use the polygonal tool, and what this will allow me to do is draw any shape. It doesn't have to be rectangular. And you can see that if I just do something like this, I get a polyline shape that I can manipulate and turn into any shape that I want, and that becomes my viewport. I can also take any 2D shape, let's say a circle, and turn that into a viewport. And I can do that by using the object selection. Select this circle, and now that is a viewport. And the last thing to say is I can take a viewport that already exists and turn it into an object by using the clip tool. So let's say that I wanted to clip that part there. Go to the layout tab, go to clip, and then it says select the viewport to clip. Then it says select the object, and you can now see I've clipped that first viewport into just that circle. So there's a few tools there to be able to create these different types of layouts. Okay, I'm just going to undo that last one because I don't want that to be clipped, and I'm just going to delete these two out just for now. Okay, so there is my viewport, but it goes further than that. Viewports are really clever in the fact that if you double click inside of them, you actually sort of go through into them, and now we're in sort of a mini model space. And this isn't exactly the same as the model space. It's like you've gone through the looking glass into a model space, but you can set this up exactly however you want per viewport. However, if you draw in here, then it will actually be drawing in the model space, and it will turn out to be in the model. So you just have to be a little bit careful. But as you can see, if I change this to, let's say, the southwest isometric, and let's say that I change this to being in realistic, I can do that in that viewport. But then if I copy, let's use copy selection, and if I make a copy of this viewport, I can actually set this viewport up to be completely different. Looking at it from the left, and it could be in 2D wireframe. So they're really versatile. So the way you do that then is you just double click inside of it to open it and change it, and double click outside of it to go back onto the page. Just beware, if you double click on the border, that will maximize your viewport, and if you want to close it, then you have to come down to this little button here which says minimize viewport. It's like got a little arrow in it pointing diagonally down from the top left. Click on there and it will close down your viewport back onto your page. The next thing we need to do is think about scaling these drawings. Okay, so when we're double clicked inside, you can see that I've got down here a scale, and at the moment it's just an arbitrary scale, 0.070690 to 1, which is no scale at all. But if I click on that number, I get a pop-up window and I can set this to 1 to 25, or I could set it to 1 to 10. Like that. And you just have to be careful, because if you zoom using your middle mouse wheel, you are changing the scale. If you look down here, you can see that that scale is changing. So as you use your middle mouse wheel to move around, get everything centered, just be aware that if you zoom in or out, you've changed your scale. So the best thing to do is just, once you've set it all up exactly how you want it, just double check that you're in the right scale before you double click out of it. And then once you've done that, then you know that everything's okay. Then you can change the border and you can just set up your page exactly how you want. Now you may have noticed before when I changed the scale that we lost some of these dimensions. That's because these are annotative dimensions using annotative text. So I'm just going to show you this. So if I just zoom in, you can see that I've got both my ground plan dimensions and my elevation dimensions showing here. Now if I set this to a scale of 1 to 25, you can see that that's gone in fine and I've got all of my dimensions. However, if I change this to 1 to 10, my dimensions for the elevation disappear, but my ground plan dimensions don't. Now why is that? Well, I can show you. If I go back to the model space, and let's just put that into the home position and select one of these ground plan dimensions and go to the Annotate tab and go to the Add Delete Scales list. And you can see that this dimension has got 1 to 10 and 1 to 25 already in the list. So this dimension knows how to behave at both of those different scales. However, if I select the elevation dimension and go to the add delete scales list, you can see that it doesn't have 1 to 10 in there yet. So I could either add it in right now, or you may remember from a previous tutorial that all I need to do is make sure this button is switched on. So you can see that it says add scales to annotative objects when the annotation scale changes, and then just change the annotation scale to 1 to 10. So I've changed it there, go back to the layout, and now you can see they are present. Okay, I'll show you that one more time. I'm going to select the border of my viewport. Let's try a scale of 1 to 50. You can see there, although it's very tiny, and I can zoom in on my page just to help you see this for a second, you can see there's no dimensions. So all I need to do is go into my model space and change my display here to 1 to 50. That will automatically add that into our add and delete scales list, and because this button is on, and then go back to our layout and you can see that they are now present in our drawing. It's as simple as that. Okay, so now I'm going to just change this back to 1 to 10 so it's a little larger. Okay, and then I can just rearrange my borders just so I can see everything. Okay, it might go a little larger, pull this down a bit, double click inside, pan this across, just trying not to change the scale there, making sure that we were still on 1 to 10 before I close it, and there you can see I have a decent 1 to 10 representation of my model in isometric. Now if you find that you can't change the scale when you've selected the border and you come down here, it's most probably because you are in perspective. You can see if I turn that on, this is all greyed out now and I can't change it. So if you find that that's happening for you, just come into the viewport and just turn off perspective, change what you need to change, and then if you want it back on, you can switch it back on and double click outside of the viewport. Okay, so now let's have a look at this next viewport over here, and you can see that we're looking at our stage flat from the side, but at the moment we've got our elevation dimensions showing and our ground plan dimensions, which are kind of useless because they're laying on the floor. So we need to be able to switch those off somehow. And you may think that the way to do that is just to go to the layers drop down and switch off the ground plan dimensions using the light bulb. What that does is switch off the layer for the whole drawing. So what we need to do actually is use this third column which says freeze or thaw in current viewport. So what we're going to do is we're just going to select inside of our viewport and then come over to the drop down and switch it off for this viewport. And that's great because we can do that then for each individual viewport. Let's say on this one I don't want to see the elevation dimensions, just come over here and freeze it out for that particular viewport, and that's done. We can also add images into our layouts if we go to Insert, Attach, and I'm just going to select one of my renders from a previous tutorial. I'm just going to add that in here, and I might just make this slightly larger like so, and maybe play around with this just ever so slightly just to try and fit everything in at a decent size. Lovely. And then the last one I might do is just a viewport that is going to be maybe from the front, and make sure that is in 1 to 25 as well, like so. And then at the moment those dimensions don't make any sense, so let's just double click inside of the viewport and switch them both off for that viewport. The last thing I need to do is label this particular drawing, because this is at 1 to 25, this is at 1 to 25, and my title block says 1 to 25 for the whole drawing, but of course this one is at 1 to 10. So I'm just going to go to the Annotate tab, and I'm just going to go to the multi-line text tool. I'm just going to draw a little text box in here and type in 1 to 10. And I'm just going to change the size of this. At the moment I'm on text 100, and I might set this to Arial 8 like this. Drop this down in size, move it across, and we're done. Oh, the final thing I want to do is just make a copy of these labels so that I can label up each view. So I'm just going to type in here, side elevation, and this one will be front elevation. Great. And now this is ready for printing.